Hello and welcome everyone. This is Brian from crowdwise.org, and I'm here today with Josh Simons, co-founder and CEO of Vampr. I'm very excited to talk to you today, Josh. Now, since our mission at crowdwise.org is to help investors make more informed decisions, we're going to get to know you a little bit more as a founder and also dig into a little of the details about Vampr as a business. So to get started, why don't you tell us at a high level what Vampr is and how you came up with the idea?
Well, firstly, obviously, thank you for having me and inviting me on. Technology has been fantastic when it comes to recording music, publishing, distribution. You can do all of that now from the comfort of your home, and you don't need to work with labels. And that's amazing, but it hasn't helped solve the problem of finding the right network to be a part of, and the right network who might start generating income or who might take you to that next level. I mean, we often talk about, we want to find an algorithmic way to introduce the Pauls and Johns of the world, And that was the incentive and the motive, and that's where we started.
So how did you get to know your co-founder, Baz Palmer? And what were some of your challenges coming up through the music industry? And how does that relate to Vampr?
So my business partner and I, we go way back. He signed me to my first record deal. And basically music's a really weird, fickle game insofar as the supply chain might involve, even at like a fundamental level, like when you're just playing your first ever club show, 27 people or so, and from merch people to managers, lighting people, the list goes on. So it's really quite a convoluted thing, and yet most people who go into it, their brain doesn't operate like that. In fact, they're doing something creative because their brain doesn't necessarily want to view things as supply chains and spreadsheets, etc. The point I'm making is, me and my partner, we took a long time to find success ourselves, and he found immense success. He's 12 times platinum in a band called Hunters and Collectors, which is one of the probably most well-known Australian bands of all time. I had a fair bit of success in Australia too, and as a songwriter out here in America. But it took us in both cases about 7 years to kind of make it and start to generate an income. And I've since we've both hung up. Actually, he's going to go on a reunion tour. That's the level of fame he got to. But I've sort of hung up the guitar and I'm not playing live anymore. And I took some time off after music and said, well, that took too many years to start making a living from. It shouldn't have taken 7 years, to get to a point of being able to pay my rent. So Vampr sort of started from a point of, let's solve that problem.
Awesome. So if I'm not mistaken, you've been working on this since about 2015, correct?
Well, yeah, we founded the company in 2015. We spent that first year sort of wireframing, finding the right development team, finding a CTO, and really just building. And we kept it very low key or stealth mode, I suppose. We didn't have a landing page or do it that way. We had a preset vision of what we thought that sort of MVP beta product should look like. And we went and we built it. And then we released that in 2016, almost a year to the date, actually, that we sort of incorporated first in Australia. Was about the date that we put out the sort of beta product to the world. And then that sat out in the world for another 6 months until we were finally comfortable to sort of launch on iOS and Android and an MVP product. And so, yeah, it's interesting. It sort of almost was an 18-month process from first chat to being out there in the marketplace and actually marketing the community or trying to create a community at that point.
Fantastic. So maybe you could take a few minutes and tell us what's the state of the product today. What is Vampr, the platform, the community, kind of where you guys are at, and then where are you looking to take it in the future?
That's a great question. So right now we're sort of version 2 is out there in the market. Doesn't correlate with the numbers you will see on the App Store, but we call it version 2 because it's the second sort of major iteration of Vampr. And so the way I would describe the current product that's on the market is a one-to-one social network. It's by design, it's quite limited in terms of what you can do because the entire focus is on one thing, and that's connection. We want you as the end user to find that perfect match. And so all of the platforms, and all of its features are basically all pointing towards this one central theme and one idea. And so that's by design, we want to do one thing really well. And I think that's a great way to sort of, I guess, it's the mindset rather in tech, which is, do one thing really well, build a community around that, and then start adding features. And so that next version 3, is exactly what I described. It's adding features. So we managed to find quite a large community and a lot of people who were interested in what we were doing. And that doesn't surprise me because, you know, as I was saying at the start, everyone who's ever been in music has had this pain point. So we found the community, we built the community, we grew it, and now it's about giving them more controls, more features. And it's also and something we don't talk too much about because weirdly enough, investors are not always so receptive to this element of it, but it's also going to be more of an educational tool. So social networks that are open, so the opposite of Vampr, so think Facebook and LinkedIn, they're educational tools. Even though they might be social, you're learning all the time. You see Susie likes Matt's new book and Brendan just signed up to the New York Times. So you've just learned 3 or more data points and your mind sort of, you know, is taking all of this information in. So what we're thinking is with music, when you start, you know, having things like a feed and the ability to see how your connections are operating and moving, that people are going to start to understand the music industry a lot better. And so this lack of education that I spoke about right at the start will finally be addressed in a social environment. So it's not going to feel like you're going to school. It's not going to feel like, you know, you're being talked at. It's not going to feel like a lecture. People will be learning naturally. Oh, okay, so they've formed a band and, oh, now they've connected with the manager and, oh, now they've got a publisher. Shouldn't I be doing that same thing? And so that's where we're sort of heading with it. And that's what gets me up every morning. I'm super passionate about that because that can truly revolutionize. And I don't like hyperbolic words like that, but that can really, I think, change the way the music industry is perceived and change it from being something that people consider a hobby sort of industry to a real tangible career path.
Awesome. So I think one of the things, you know, investors right off the bat will probably question, but how does this differ, right, from some of the solutions that are out there today? So you mentioned, you know, the Facebooks or LinkedIn's. What is it that Vampr adds that isn't really meeting the need of this customer base today?
So those platforms, excuse me, are not dedicated platforms. And I suppose, like, let's start, there's different answers to different platforms, but let's start with LinkedIn. Firstly, you know, I think only 4% or something of their entire makeup of users identify as creatives. So we're not their priority and we never will be. And like any tech startup, big or small, you follow the data and you follow the information, and the information suggests that creatives aren't messing with LinkedIn. So LinkedIn's not thinking about us. So when you're a musician and you're looking for or even just a creative, and you're looking for a creative solution or creative person to collaborate with in some way, there's several things that you need to sort of understand and assess, and they're mainly audio visual. You know, do they sound good, or do they look good, or do they fit my vibe, my tribe? Do we like the same things? So these are all very personal qualities in some respects, and there's an element of judgment in a good way involved. Personal judgment, you're assessing people. LinkedIn's the complete opposite. It's all resume and CV based. So it's scroll platform number one, and scroll is not particularly friendly to the next generation of digital natives, but we're not scroll whatsoever. We're fully interactive. And so, I mean, that's the answer to the LinkedIn one. They're not looking to solve the problem we're looking to solve. They never will. And in its current form, it's absolutely useless in being meaningful for this group of people. When it comes to Facebook and Facebook groups, here's the problem. I can't just go on Facebook and say, find me a guitarist in Los Angeles who also listens to Pink Floyd. On Vampr, I can. And so, I mean, that's the simple answer. And I could go on, but there's almost no need to. Facebook is a friend platform. We're a meet platform. So Facebook's an extraordinary platform for you to find someone you went to high school with, but it's terrible for you to find someone you didn't know existed, you know? So that would be in a nutshell the answer to why those. I think, you know, the other thing you could look at is the sort of gig economy platforms like Fiverr and places like that. They're good for one-off projects, and we look at them as not community building so much as gig, exactly as they describe themselves. They are gig platforms, and we're not trying to build gigs. We're trying to introduce the Johns to the Pauls and people to find their lifelong creative partners. And not always going to be a lifelong creative partner. We're also just trying to help people find what they need when they need it. And again, those other sites that we've discussed, they don't do that. That's not their core business. It's not really even their ancillary business.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when you talk about or think about your ideal customer and the people who are going to be using this platform, is it more of these people who are doing this on the side, entrepreneurs trying to make a living? What does your ideal customer avatar look like?
Sure. So there's multiple use cases, and we sort of make our case in the pitch deck, as to what they are. But in answer to your question, there's going to be both. I mean, right now, our user base is made up of hobbyists, semi-professionals, and professionals. And you treat them all differently. And to be fair, LinkedIn actually treats it the same way too. They've got different tiers of subscription, and they're very much geared towards, one I think is geared towards people who just want to look good on LinkedIn. I think it even says, make your profile look better. Then the next one's for businesses that are looking for hiring, and the third one's for professional recruiters. So Vampr, premium tier will be somewhat similar in respects that there'll be certain features that will appeal to the hobbyist. I'll give you an example. A hobbyist might be a SoundCloud rapper who has 1 million streams on SoundCloud, 50,000 followers on Instagram, but he can't really get his stuff in front of labels because he lives in a small country town and they haven't discovered him yet. So that might be a hobbyist who signs up to Vampr Pro and says, I want to get directly in touch with an A&R at Sony. A professional who might use it might be a graphic designer who, let's say, loves working with bands, makes most of their money every year from designing album covers, but spends like $1,000+ on going to gigs, on reach out, on lead gen tools to try and maybe find a new band who might like his or her stuff. With Vampr, that same person can sign up, get the pro thing, remove swipe limits, and just do literally a year's worth of lead generation to exactly what she wants, or he or she wants, that being bands looking for graphic designers, and do it in a day. So that's an example of a professional who would sign up to Vampr Pro. And then there's everything in between. And so with Vampr Pro, basically will consist of about 16 different features that you won't get with the freemium tier, and we'll target some of those features towards people who use the app in various ways.
All right. And when you mentioned Vampr Pro, can you talk a little bit about some of the economics? So what, I guess, is the going rate plan going to be of what you're going to charge customers to use that? How many of your users, if it's not rolled out today, how many of your users do you expect are going to want to go to that premium pro tier? What are some of the economics around that?
Yeah, so it's not rolled out today, and it's the main motivator behind the crowdfund is to use these funds essentially to build Vampr Pro. Our stretch target is 4.5% of users signing up. It's not an arbitrary number. We looked at subscription numbers across the board in music specifically. It's the one part, I suppose, of our business model that is a forecast or an assumption rather than based purely on our historical growth and internal data. But it's a stretch target, the 4.5% adoption. As far as the economics of it, we're looking at a $4.99 per month subscription. This was in consultation with people who have rolled out subscription, tiers in the music space. Again, if you look at our advisor list, we have Matt Adele there, who sort of took Beatport from being somewhat of a scrappy startup to being a very profitable company and ultimately selling. We spent a lot of time with him discussing price points. We looked at other meat platforms and where they started their price points. We talked with one of the guys who actually designed the entire premium version of Tinder. I'm not going to name his name because he's not an advisor, but we consulted with people who have done this basically to decide what is a price point that makes sense for our customers. I would also follow that up by saying, let's let data show us the way. So if there's not enough people signing up, perhaps it's too high. If everyone's signing up, then the barrier to entry is way too low, and we should probably increase that. And I think we need to respond accordingly. So there's going to be a bit of trial and error there. Our plan is to package all of the features into one, but we may find that that's not appealing to people and that they just want to pay for one or two features. I'm a big fan of following data. So once we deploy that Vampr Pro product in sort of 9 months' time, which is the plan, we're going to see what the audience or see what the market tells us about our assumptions.
Okay, and since we're talking a little bit about data already, but I think I saw in some of the materials that, your initial projections of where you would be today were actually much more conservative than where you're actually at in terms of the number of users. What do you think has been some of the reason that, it's almost been this market pull that you're really doing, so much better than you thought? And it seems like compared to some of the competitors that are out there, you guys have a lot more of the market share. Can you talk about what some of your differentiators are or why you think it is like that today?
Yeah, so I think the reason we set the projections where we had them is, over 3 or 4 years, we raised about $900,000, but that's not a lot of money, especially when you think about dividing that up over 3 or 4 years. It's actually quite a small amount of money. And so we didn't think, there'd be all that much left for marketing whatsoever after building a product. And I've been involved in lots of successful things in my life, but I've never ever counted on viral growth. So, and that was the same here. So we set very realistic goals as to where we thought we'd hit along the way, as you can see on the campaign page. As to why we've had some success, I would go back to an answer I gave earlier, which is Vampr is a very focused, quite limited product. And so by definition, it's going to attract, people who are looking for that very specific solution. And that's kind of, I don't know if you call that product market fit or if you just call that a lean product, or somewhere in between the two. But that's where we find ourselves today. And we know how they use it. We know which parts of it they like. We know which parts of it they don't like. And we've always responded accordingly. For example, in version 1, it seems so obvious now, but there wasn't we call it the shout out bubble that says what people are looking for. So you just saw a profile, but you had no clue what the hell the person was there for. And now, looking back, it's like, why wasn't that there straight away? But we had enough people saying, I don't get it, that it was like, oh, okay. And we added that. And then lo and behold, growth started happening. And that's just one example. Obviously it's a combination of a lot of factors and features, but I would suggest that's why we've had some very healthy natural traction. And we've also, I shouldn't discredit the work I've done with my marketing team too, which is in our development of this really sophisticated growth engine where we can quite practically and reliably predict exactly how many people we'll get for a dollar spent. And we spent a long time on that. That's what I've been spending most of my time on, to be frank, for the last 2 years now. So yeah.
Okay. And maybe, so Vampr Pro sounds like definitely one potential, once that gets rolled out, that'll be one potential source of revenue. Can you talk about other sources of revenue, either planned or current, that you guys are looking into?
Yeah, the other main part of the business model is advertising. We talk about highly contextual advertising, which is the much more manual form of having a sales team actually going out there and selling ads to people like labels, instrument manufacturers, once we expand to other creators, maybe camera makers. You get what I'm saying. And the reason we do it like that is we're not interested in designing an ads platform at this point that self-service like Snapchat and Facebook have. It's not really looked upon particularly favorably right now. You are selling user data at that point. And you open the door to people scraping information about the user base. That goes against everything we've ever been about from day one. So right now, we do sell ad space, although the ads appear as organic profiles, and we're very, very selective with who we work with and how we report the success of those ads. It's been quite good for us so far. It's generated well over $100,000, about $10,000 a monthly recurring revenue at the moment. It does take up a lot of time, and the idea of putting a salesperson on it is something that we'll look into in the next 18 months before any sort of Series A event, but it is not a priority, and it doesn't account for a particularly high percentage of our overall ARPU when you look at our whole business model.
Okay. And touching on something you were already touching on a little bit, but I think, one of the issues or kind of challenges that a lot of these other social networks run into once they start really going to scale is privacy. Is there anything you can talk about in terms of how you guys are thinking about that today, or how you're already implementing certain things to make sure that you'll be able to handle that as you scale?
Yeah, so the conversation around privacy right now is a really interesting one, because it's something we were talking about quite, certainly before the public was talking about it, but we were talking about it during our branding stages in 2015. And, it started with us of what do we want this community to be? And back then we were talking about, we don't want, a downvote button. We don't want it to be about a view count. We don't want there to be, and it's all, we're watching all these companies do these things now. My Instagram no longer shows me how many likes. I know they're rolling that out with some users. As one example, obviously ad platforms like what we were just discussing, self-service ones, have been stripped back from, I remember when in the Facebook Ads Manager, when I could type in a product category and see exactly how many people liked a certain topic. But that's kind of gross. And so they're rolling all of these things back now. Really good for us as business, entrepreneurs who want to understand marketplaces and such. Really invasive in many respects. So yeah, built into our DNA, and I don't mean this lightly, I mean it quite seriously, was always, we don't want this to be a place where there's room for that. Now that's not to say that at some point down the line, Vampr could find ourselves where some fringe group, whether it's the hard left or the hard right, take over, but I can't see it happening, because we're predominantly a community of 13 to 24-year-old young creators who want to get ahead. And they're all there for the same reason, which is validation, number one, which is so important, because that's arguably the scariest part of being a young creative, is actually having the courage to put your work out there in a safe space. Again, that might be one of the appeals of Vampr versus our competitors. But it's validation, number one. It's feeling like you're in a safe community. And that's what we've already got now with the limited one-to-one network and no view counts and such. And it's what will extend when we open it up, when we bring in the feed, as I say, things like not putting a down button and yeah. So it's been built into the DNA. It's something we think about. It's certainly a part of the sort of wireframes and the scope of V3. Who knows what will happen, but we're certainly on the right side of that conversation, and we're always there to begin with, and I'm proud of that.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
One other question along the lines of potential obstacles or challenges, what are kind of the one or two biggest things that are keeping you guys up at night, or that you see to reaching that next milestone, whether it's the launch of Vampr Pro or something else in the future? Yeah,
the thing that we actually did a very similar interview to this with King's Crowd this morning.
Oh yeah.
They asked you that question too. And honestly, the thing that keeps me up at night is not being able to deliver on the plans and the promises that we're making to the public. So the last 3 or 4 years, I've had to make plans and promises to investors, and I've always taken them very seriously. And that used to keep me up and still does. But we're now very publicly saying, this is what we're going to do. This is what we're going to hit. This is the timeline. And there's a few things that could derail that. Not reaching our desired amount of capital in this particular round is probably number one. So if we don't reach that $1.5 million mark, it doesn't mean Vampr won't go on. It means we'll do a pared back version of Vampr Pro. And in fact, we've actually planned exactly what we'll peel off. We've gotten down to that level that, because the private investment conversations we're having alongside this CF, people have been asking us, well, what happens if we only hit $500,000? And so we've looked at our blueprint of what we want to do in the next 18 months. And we've gone, well, we can cost most of these things, and we can certainly prioritize what we believe to be most important, so that we will deploy. It's not a question of if, it's more a question of how much of the product will we deploy. And that keeps me up a little bit, because I want the whole product. But you always want the whole product, and you always end up shipping something that's slightly different, and that's tech as well. So being year 4 in Vampr, I've had some experience at that. And you need to be steadfast in your vision, but you need to be malleable enough to move with your circumstance. So I worry about not raising enough money, but I think every founder probably worries about that to an extent. I don't know that makes me particularly unique. So maybe a boring answer to your question, but certainly that would be my number one concern.
No, it's good to know. So assuming that everything goes well with the campaign, that you get the funds that you were looking to get, can you talk a little bit about the strategy of how you plan to scale to this number, your goal number of users in X number of years?
Yeah, so I think you look at, we talked about the growth engine briefly before. So we have a pretty fixed amount that we spend on marketing per month, but we also have a fixed rate at which we increase it ever so gradually. So we'll be ramping up that rate ever so slightly, whilst simultaneously doubling our team size. So when you look at the sort of use of funds, we're talking about spending probably significantly more on product than marketing, because the marketing is kind of taking care of itself right now, to be perfectly fair. Our growth rate's quite healthy. As I say, we'll increase the rate at which we increase that spending each month, but that's kind of taking care of itself. We're really talking about doubling the team size, hiring another iOS guy, another Android guy, another back-end guy, probably another QA guy as well, and really focus on shipping products in iterations, but also really fast as well. We want to test a lot of this stuff ASAP. So as soon as we can start shipping, even like the earliest version of Vampr Pro may come sooner than 9 months. It really depends how granular we get in those deliverables and delivering new features to the public. So that's basically what we'll do with our use of funds. And that's what we'll do with our use of, I suppose, marketing ramp up as well. It's not going to be double marketing spend and pray for the best. It's going to be each month maybe up at 2% or something like that, and cap it at some point. But it's all been allocated, I suppose, for the next 18 months, which is, and I keep coming back to 18 months. I should explain that's our sort of goal, is to be at a Series A point in 18 months' time. It's all of our milestones with respect to user numbers, but also revenue. They all point towards this 18 months after we close this round. This is what we want to achieve. And I think they're realistic. Again, the only assumption on the business model is the stretch target in adoption rates for subscription. Everything else is based strictly on the historical performance of Vampr.
Okay. And maybe going back a little bit, but to your team, I think you mentioned a lot about yourself and your co-founder's background. Can you touch briefly upon just some of the other team members, your tech, how you're building the product? Are they full-time? Are they part-time? And what your team currently looks like today?
Yeah, so, well, the SEC, or the GAAP definition of full-time, means on payroll. So I want to be clear that when I say full-time, I don't necessarily mean in compliance with those rules. But the team's full-time contracted to us. So, they might not be on payroll, but it's full-time contractors. And you have to do that in a startup, because, you have runways that sometimes expire, and then you have to put people on hold for a couple of months. And it is the nature of tech. But we have a team of about 6 developers, including QA. And the background there, I guess I won't go into the background of every single member. Suffice to say, most of them have worked together before, and all of them have been with us almost since the beginning, which I'm very proud of. And the main sort of lead developer there is a guy called Jasper Blues, who built the Typhoon library, which is used, I think, about 1.5 million different apps or something. So he's got some pretty serious chops behind him. They used it in the building of Grindr, which is a similar sort of idea insofar as it's a meat platform like we are. So he has the real experience there. And our CTO is sort of more of a project manager, I suppose, and a CTO, because he coordinates all of these guys who are in various countries. His background is working for the major television stations in Australia. So we've only got 3 stations over there. There's about 100 over here in the States, as you know, but there's only 3 in Australia, and he sort of has played a technical role with them for years, and we poached him, I think, back in 2015 when we started. So we've got these 2 guys that sort of together really have the experience and know their chops, and they help build out the rest of the team, who are mostly remote. So they're not offshore, because offshore sort of suggests that you're sending it to another company offshore. No, we all work on the same time zone. We all have an agreed sort of 12-hour window where we're all available to each other. And that's how it's worked for close to 3 years now. And we're pretty proud of that system. The one thing we would like to do when we grow to double the team is to bring people into the physical rooms together. And so that's going to be a real change in the culture of the company over the next 18 months, especially because a lot of our guys are in the same country. We might start looking at setting up some, little co-working spaces in those places.
That's great. So starting to maybe wrap things up, but for investors, can you talk a little bit about your mindset of, potential exits, or do you want to grow this into kind of a self-sustaining business? What's your long-term vision for Vampr?
Yeah, so this is not a tricky question to answer, but there's certain conversations that are under NDA which make this hard to answer as fluidly as I'd like, or as transparently, rather, is a better word. Look, acquisition of Vampr is something that a lot of companies are looking at, and that shouldn't come as a surprise. We are the market leaders with a pretty lean operation with very low burn rate. You wouldn't be surprised to know that many companies have offered to buy us. Now, if we were going to take those offers, we wouldn't be having this chat probably, right? So that should provide some sort of insight. But I also want to say too, I don't want to be sending the wrong message out to the world. There's a reason we entertain those conversations, because there might be a good fit, that there might be a company that wants to buy us that will fund my vision and my company's vision of what we want to achieve going forward. So I will always entertain an acquisition chat, but then certain things need to align in order for those to make sense. Outside of that, the goal is, and what we've been doing since day one, is trying to build a self-sustaining company that continues to scale, and we'll do the traditional Series A, Series B, etc., and take it to IPO. And that, for me, would be a fitting end to this story. But there are a multitude of things that could happen along the way, and as I said, some of those conversations are happening, but unlikely in the short term.
Okay, well said. So one other question, could you talk a little bit about why you engaged with CrowdCheck as part of your equity crowdfunding campaign? Because as a potential investor, that's something that I haven't seen a lot. So can you talk about some of your rationale there?
Yeah, we had a confusing process that we needed to do a group consolidation before we were legally allowed to crowdfund. So we started as an Australian three Australian corporations and one American LLC. And it made a lot of sense for our original investors, and there was a lot of IP protections embedded in that. But we needed to, in order to be eligible to crowdfund in the US, consolidate into Delaware corporation. So we needed to get a law firm who was going to be able to pull together threads from multiple jurisdictions around the world, and that wasn't going to be an easy feat. We also wanted to basically use that process as a chance to audit everything and be as transparent as possible. So it's a couple of reasons. Number one, it's sort of built into Baz and I's, just that's who we are as people. And number two, I'd looked at a lot of crowdfund pages myself and thought, there's a lot of holes here. There's a lot of things that, I don't really know if they're telling the truth, because I'm reading this and I've already poked apart their business plan on. So I thought, is there a way that we can sort of have a legal team who can help with the consolidation, but also do an independent audit, or help us coordinate the independent audit rather. And CrowdCheck sort of sat somewhere in the middle. They have contract lawyers that are separate, that came in and did the consolidation while they did the audit. And it just kind of made sense. And it did cost us a lot of money. It was, I'm not going to go into the exact figure, but it was, tens of thousands of dollars really all up, to subject ourselves to that, and going through everything, every minutes we'd ever written in all of our companies, and proving that, everything we said was true, was absolutely exhausting. We started in February and we didn't wrap it up until June, just so people understand. And really the process we subjected ourselves to was akin to doing an IPO. It was that level of detail, but I'm proud of it. The one regret I might have is that it seems like we have some metrics on what people do on the campaign page, and it seems like most people don't care, as in they don't get that far. They're already sold on the business. Now that might be a testament to how good the video is, or the other, who knows. But I don't know that we probably needed to go maybe to the lengths that we did, but I'm proud of the fact that we have, and it certainly helps. It's always good to get your ducks in a row as your business evolves from one phase to another. And we are going through an evolution right now as a company. So I think I'm really proud of it. Yeah.
So I think you've answered most of my questions today, Josh. Is there anything else we didn't touch upon that you want to make sure that people are aware of before we sign off?
I think it's important to just highlight that the expansion from musicians to creatives will be handled in a really delicate manner and not haphazardly, because it's something that's come up a lot. I've seen, especially in the question section so far in this, crowdfunding, is people going, oh, you don't know anything about other creative fields. And I just want to address that. We do, first of all. Everyone who works on our development team has been leaders in a creative field, number one. Number two, as musicians, as I was explaining right at the top of the chat, so it's a nice bookend to this little conversation. As a musician, you deal with almost every single creative field. You deal with video directors, you deal with photographers, you deal with dancers, you deal with, 3D visual artists. I'm not going to bore you, but the list goes on. And so one thing we've already been doing with Vampr, and maybe we should just quickly touch on that, is, and I'm just going to bring up a spreadsheet, so just give me a second. Mm-hmm. Here we go, got it right in front of me. Is we already have 53 different markets that we speak to inside the app. Like, not markets, but sort of roles in the creative world. And they haven't been added coincidentally. They've been added very slowly and methodically as demand has arisen, because we obviously have a support inbox and people send us emails and they go, why aren't venues covered? Lots of venues were hitting us up saying, why is there not a category for a venue? So we've actually been opening up for a long time. It's just that we're going to put more of a focus on those additional fields. So right now I can tell you that on the entire Vampr user base, singers make up 11% of our users. Then producers at 7.6. But then let's go down. 2.3 of our user base are videographers. That's a huge community of videographers. I don't know if there's any other platforms for videographers. I don't know enough about that particular vertical right now without doing some research. But my point is, that's not an insignificant number of people. We have 5% of our user base identify as managers. Again, that's a lot of managers to have on one space. And you got to think about what you can do with that. And there are some things we are doing. I mean, 6% of our community is songwriters, and we've got some really big announcements coming up with PROs. And I don't know if you're familiar with PROs, but they're performance rights organizations, and they're the companies that collect royalties for songwriters and distribute them. Now, every country in the world has one or two. Some countries have three. America has three. And you basically elect which one you want to be representing you, and it's their job to make sure you get paid. We're going to be doing some really cool things with them, and we'll be announcing it in the coming weeks. Now, that's just, again, us helping one vertical inside of this vertical of creative. So I just wanted to address that. People sort of go, oh, well, you don't understand this vertical that you're going into. There's multiple verticals inside of the vertical of creatives, and you get to know each space and you get to do interesting things in each of them. And we don't need them all to win. We just need it to be a supportive community of creatives. And I think you'll see a lot of folks gravitate towards that, as they already have, as proven by our historical performance.
Thank you again. I guess for any potential investors who are interested in learning more, they can head over to the WeFunder campaign page where all the details will be found there. But other than that, thanks again, Josh.